This year, the memorial lecture will be delivered by an eminent expert in decentralization and public governance, Shri T. Raghunandhan, former IAS officer of the Karnataka cadre. We are also blessed with the online presence of Srimati Padma Ramachandran, wife of late B. Ramachandran, one of the first women Indian Administrative Service officers. She was also the first women Chief Secretary of Kerala. We also have the esteemed presence of Shri Narayan Ramachandran, son of late B. Ramachandran, serving as Chairman, Teamly Services Limited, founder of Include Labs, and co-chairman of Unitas Capital. And Srimati Shobha Narayan, daughter-in-law of late B. Ramachandran. She is an Indian author, journalist, and columnist. The topic of today's lecture is Democratic Decentralization in India at the Crossroads. I request Shri T. Raghunandhan and Shri S.M. Vijayanand, Chairman CMD, to kindly occupy the chairs on the dais. Request Dr. 𝗏𝗲𝗺𝗵𝗵𝗁, Director, Center for Management Development, to deliver the welcome address.
Chairman of CMD, Shri S.M. Vijayanand sir, Senior Secretaries to Government, former Directors, and our the family members of Shri V. Ramachandran sir. Let me also welcome our speaker for the day, who keenly agreed to speak about Shri V. Ramachandran sir the moment we reached out to him, and was more than happy to talk about it. And I think this also marks a great occasion for us, because the mantle has been handed over to Vijayanand sir from Shri Ramachandran sir, and we have been moving it forward. It's all critical because CMD as an organization is now growing and looking forward to becoming a key player in terms of capacity building and training in the public sector sphere. We are also looking forward to reaching a 50-year landmark, and I think these were all built stone by stone over a period of time. Now let me get into my formal duty of welcoming the dignitaries, the speaker, and for the sake of formality, let me welcome our guiding force and the person who has been arranging the speaker himself and a lot more of work. And I will not take it away from him, because we are also planning to release a couple of books which he'll probably detail it. A chairman, Shri S.M. Vijayanand sir, on behalf of the entire audience here and on my behalf, welcome you to this function. So, on behalf of the entire audience, CMD, and on my personal behalf, sir, welcome you to this gathering, and thank you for accepting this. Madam Sheila Thomas, I'm sorry. I've been a great fan of ma'am because of her simplicity and the way she works around. So when she was Additional Chief Secretary also. Welcome to this talk, ma'am. Shri 𝗟𝗲𝗺𝗁 sir, welcome. Thank you for taking out your time. You handle finance, and I know that's a very tough time to do that. Madam 𝗏𝗵𝗵𝗁𝗏, ma'am, welcome to this gathering. And our former director, Shivraman sir, Jayagoma sir, and Shri P.V. Unnikrishnan sir, and all of you. I'm not going name by name, and thank you all for taking out your time and coming over here to listen to this lecture. It makes us a great occasion to think about the great soul who worked for this. Let me not fail in my duty by not inviting Mr. Narayan, Madam Mrs. V. Ramachandran, and his family to this occasion. Thank you for joining us online. We hope to get you here physically, maybe next time or year next. So once again, all of you, thank you for joining in, and looking forward to a great section. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Let me now invite Shri S.M. Vijayanand, Chairman, Center for Management Development, and former Chief Secretary, Government of Kerala, to deliver the presidential address.
Most respected Padma Madam, Mr. Narayan, I think you can hear us. Happy to see you both of you again after a year. My very close friend T. R. Raghunandhan, our director, distinguished guests and participants. This is our 7th memorial lecture, and I have been giving the opening address. And now I can write a book on Shri V. Ramachandran. the stages of my, I wouldn't take too much of your time. The stages of my relationship with Raman sir. When I entered service, he was the Commissioner for Economic Development in 1982 when we were called on him for the first time. It was one of awe. He was very junior. He became an officer 1 year before I was born. So that kind of respect and awe. Then saw him as the Chief Secretary. And I attended one or two meetings sitting at the last row on Western Guard development. Absolutely matter of fact, very fast, efficient, and all decisions crisply recorded. You used to take 10-12 minutes for things which we take 2 hours. And of course, I have mentioned every time, master of every subject, right from development of PVTGs up to export and import or whatever it is, free trade, everything. And in great detail as required for a government, not for anything else. So that kind of knowledge. Then we became very close through our decentralization. He himself was a great supporter of decentralization throughout. Much of it silently, but very strongly. He was associated with EMS Namboodiripad in the very first ARC report, which strongly recommended Panchayati Raj. Then he came out with a master report on district councils. There is something called doing decentralization, which my friend Raghu understands. Actually doing it and bringing about decentralization in a highly centralized setup is extremely difficult. How to do it? It's almost like a do-it-yourself manual if you adapt it properly. He came out as a report, and years later, Mr. B.N. Yugandhar, who was then a planning commission member and a great disciple of V. Ramanathan sir, came and told me, Vijayanand, this is very rare, you get it printed. So at that time, I knew CMD, but I got it printed through Kila, which we had a lot of money at that time, and it was circulated widely. I think even now copies are available. If it's running out of stock, we should reprint it and to give it to every decentralization activist. Then, when Kerala's People's Plan started, obviously he was not in the government. And later, in 2001, when he became vice chairman, people don't recall his contribution. Everybody thought when government changes, decentralization will stop, just as literacy stopped in 91. Everybody, even the decentralization activists, thought that it's going to end. It survived, it deepened, and probably, many may not agree, I would say it became better. And the silent hand and silent support of Shri V. Raghunandhan was the key. Of course, Mr. Anthony was a great decentralization supporter, but all others were anti-decentralization, including the finance department. Violently anti-decentralization. And he had a very, very mature and diplomatic way of telling people, do you want one sentence? At one point of time, I was in the close discussion with senior political ministers saying that, Paisa illa, we can't give. Then he said, do you want to risk this at this point of time? Just one question. They said, no, we'll do it later. So decentralization survived, and he played a very, very critical role. And more importantly, he used to guide me. I'm not of course, in a way, I get very emotional and write strong notes, but he would kind of tone them down by enhancing the meaning, not toning down the meaning. And at that time, somebody from behind the scenes came out with I can openly call it a foolish idea, that Kudumbashree would be stopped and you will have Kudumba Sangamam. And Kudumbashree, it was budding at that time, just 2 years or 3 years into his formation. And somebody wanted to kill it, basically from bureaucracy. I don't think there was any political motive behind it. And then I wrote 2 pages of notes against that proposal, which was announced without our knowing by the governor in the address to the first address, policy address of the governor. So Mr. Ramachandran sir called, no, Vijayanand, don't write like this. Just say that we will pilot Kudumba Sangamam in one block and observe it for 6 months. I was not wise enough. It could not be piloted. It's such a foolish idea that it can't be piloted. So I wrote a beautiful note, sent it to CM. He may pilot it in one block. It didn't happen. So that was a kind of way he could. And at that time, for the first time, the government started interacting with the local government associations very closely. And the Finance Commission, the first time in the history of India, the local government association submitted memoranda to the Union Finance Commission. Normally it's done by the state governments. And Planning Board helped them draft it. It was their idea, but we drafted it and gave it to them. So, and allocations. The highest allocation in the history of Kerala to local governments was made in 2002. Exactly 33 and 1/3%. It has never touched it. Now it is, I think, 28.5. It may end up at 30. So, all these things, I think we should. Then, of course, later, he became a mentor, guide, philosopher. And after 2 decades in service, I became an apprentice, a learner again under him at the age of 40. Anyway, I'll not take much time. And that clarity which comes only from people who know deep and wide experience. So we have put a collection of his writings, which will be released today. I read all of them, mostly reread, I must say. I have read it in the earlier thing. And a rare capacity to organically think from the micro to the macro and macro to the micro. Everything. You can read it and enjoy it. So, such a great person. And we thought we should treasure that. The biggest loss Kerala had, or India, a civil service in India had, I am dead against speaking about ifs in history. He didn't write a memoir. Had he written a memoir, it would have been a textbook for every civil servant. I persuaded him with great difficulty towards the end of my tenure in Kerala before I went to Delhi. He agreed. But as usual in bureaucracy, your successor doesn't take forward what you decide. It didn't happen. Otherwise, had we penned down how we guided policy, not sensationalism, under Mrs. Gandhi for 7 years and later under Morarji Desai, how there were only 2 joint secretaries in the PMO at that time and 1 secretary. So practically half the governance functions he was coordinating. He knew everything. But unfortunately, there's a miss. Anyway, I've been repeating it every time. Again, Now, a brief introduction about my friend, Mr. Raghunandhan, who is well known to the family. And he shares my feelings about V. Ramadana sir. So, he will also speak about him, I'm sure. And he's a jack of all trades and a master of all of them, which is very rare. You can be... And Panchayati Raj, of course, he once gave me a compliment. He has very dry humor. A friend of mine asked him, "You're a master in Panchayati Raj." Then he said, "I am only a 𝗟𝗲𝗺 𝗁𝗵𝗿. The Dawood is in Kerala." So that was something he replied to a friend of mine. So I think it's almost touching 25 years, isn't it, Raghu? 2001, we met each other for the first time, and then thereafter has been a continuous relationship. Now it is more political conversation and nothing to do with Panchayati Raj, especially during 24 elections. Almost every day, we used to exchange very frankly our own views on the current political situation. He's an expert in e-governance, but something you should all know, he's an expert in old automobiles. He, by himself, can restore a 1920s vehicle. And he himself has a good collection. I've traveled in one of them. And the other extreme, he is the #1 expert in the country on railway engines. He can restore an old railway engine. Now, railways seek his advice when they don't have the drawings. So, I think he once went to the British Museum to get drawings of India's old 19th century this thing. So, wide hobby. His roots in Palakkad. Once in a while, he tells me that he'll come to settle down in Palakkad, but that's very unlikely unless the Bangalore can send him. But most importantly, his amazing courage. So, in spite of close friendship, I never call him for a lecture on Kerala's Panchayati Raj. He'll tear me to pieces. So he's very, very frank. He has his own strong views on Kerala's decentralization and my work in decentralization. But we continue as very thick friends and looking forward to a great lecture from you, Raghu. Thanks to all of you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, sir. It's a great honor for me to invite Shri T. Raghunandhan to kindly deliver the 7th V. Ramachandran Memorial Lecture.
Thank you. Padma Madam, Narayan and Shobha, because of the traffic situation in Bangalore, we meet online because that's easier than coming to your place from Whitefield. My dear friend Vijayanand, respected, distinguished members of the audience, many of whom are personal friends. Wonderful to see you. Coming back to Kerala for me, it's like a deep sea diver coming up for oxygen. I come here and I look at, in fact, I was just telling Mr. Vijayanand that, while the rest of the country is looking at certain problems, you are looking at the third generation of problems. You have put 30 to 40 years ahead with respect to most issues, and particularly with respect to democratic decentralization, about which I've been asked to speak today, and I will speak. But first, let me remember Mr. V. Ramachandran. For somebody who influenced me a great deal in my life, I really cannot remember the first time that I met him. I had heard a lot about him from Vijayanand. I was Secretary Rural Development in Karnataka when I had a delightful minister called Mr. 𝗵𝗵𝗁𝗂𝗵𝗵. I seem to have the uncanny knack of attracting a lot of maverick bosses, and Mr. 𝗵𝗺𝗵 was one of those. And Mr. Vijayanand was a member of a committee that we constituted in Karnataka to re-energize the model of democratic decentralization. Kerala had done much better at that time. And subsequently in 2004, when the government of India for the first time, the NDA, the UPA government won, established the Ministry of Panchayati Raj as an independent ministry. Earlier, Panchayati Raj was handled by one joint secretary in the Ministry of Rural Development. When the Ministry of Panchayati Raj was set up and I was taken in as joint secretary, all that Mr. Vijayanand had told me about Mr. V. Ramachandran was in my mind, because Mr. Vijayanand used to constantly refer to Mr. V. Ramachandran. This mythical figure was like the demigod sitting in Kerala and directing how this process of democratic decentralization should be taken through the minefield of political contestation. Mr. Manishankar knew Mr. V. Ramachandran quite well, because both of them at different times of their lives had been joint secretaries in the ministry, in the Prime Minister's office. And a committee was constituted in 2005, a few months after I joined, which was to look at creating a national broad framework for local planning. And I was made the member convener of, not the member convener, the convener of that committee, and Mr. V. Ramachandran was made the chairperson. The committee came out with a report in 2006. And that was the time when I interacted with him on virtually a daily basis. And the first thing that struck me was actually not his immense knowledge. I mean, that was a given. But he was an immensely witty person. He had this sardonic sense of humor. And I have a fatal flaw, like Mr. Manishankar here, of not taking myself too seriously beyond a point, of seeing humor in some of the most serious of government situations. And so Mr. V. Ramachandran had that knack. But that knack did not come at the expense of depth of knowledge. So here you had a delightful individual who really knew what he was speaking about, who really understood things, who had this calm, self-assured air about himself, but also was not unwilling to joke about certain incongruities. And incongruities, there are plenty in government. In fact, one thing that is not mentioned is that having lost all hope in good governance now, I actually do a lot of stand-up comedy in governance, not in front of this august audience, so do not ask me. But Mr. V. Ramachandran was a person who showed me that even in the darkest of times, you could actually have a good laugh at what you are doing, and that would energize you to do better things. I remember once at a meeting, after a long meeting which was quite chaotic, and I was getting increasingly irritated about keeping the notes. At the end of the day, I said, "Sir, how am I going to prepare the minutes?" He said, "You write exactly what you want as the outcome of this. You must never give up an opportunity to write the minutes, because you will write what you want to write. People will sign it without seeing it. Later on, they will realize the implications, and then they will be too embarrassed to admit that they did not read it. So you have your way." So I said, "That's a brilliant idea." And I did. There are some meetings that where the minutes bear absolutely no reference to what really happened. So I would say that Mr. V. Ramachandran was like Sir Humphrey Appleby, but with a solid conscience. You know, he just had this knack of piloting things well. But to talk about the depth of knowledge, after we worked together in that committee, Dr. Manmohan Singh, who was quite a close friend of Mr. V. Ramachandran, invited him, and he presented the copy of the report that we had prepared on planning. And that was the first time that guidelines were issued on local planning after 1967. The next time that it was done was in 2006, when Mr. V. Ugandhar was a member of the Planning Commission. So Mr. V. Ramachandran took this report, presented it to Manmohan Singh, Dr. Manmohan Singh, and then Mr. Manishankar Iyer was keen that we should also look at a report on democratic decentralization in the areas that are not covered by the by Part 9 and 9A of the Constitution, which meant the 6 scheduled areas, which meant areas of Nagaland, of Ladakh, and so on and so forth. And Mr. V. Ramachandran was made a member of, the chairperson of that committee, and I continued as the convener of that committee. That was a remarkable education. I traveled with him throughout all over the Northeast. We met different communities in the Northeast, went by helicopter to some really remote areas. In fact, I remember once landing up at an airport where the pilot asked me, "Kahan jana hai aapko?" So I had to tell the pilot where we were supposed. He had no idea where we were supposed to go, and he made a phone call to somebody at that place to light a smoke signal. This was not very, shall I say, encouraging for us. And one of the times that I found Mr. V. Ramachandran at a complete loss of words was once in Mizoram. The pilot had dropped us to a particular place south of Mizoram, where the Lai community stays. And we've had a discussion with the Lai community, and the pilot said that he would fly out at 1:30. He would not wait beyond 1:30 because the weather could turn bad. And so we rushed to the helipad, where there was a charming young gentleman of the mid-30s who was sitting there, a jolly chap. And there was Mr. Ugandhar, Mr. V. Ramachandran, and I. We were waiting for the helicopter. And this young gentleman introduced himself to us after knowing who we were and all that as the newly elected MLA from that area. So Mr. V. Ramachandran, sharp as ever, he said, "But the elections happened 4 years back or 3 years back, right? How come you are a newly elected MLA?" He said, "Sir, there was a by-election and I got elected. The previous MLA died in a helicopter crash." On that journey, Mr. V. Ramachandran did not speak a word. And I remember that we were flying between 2 mountain ranges. The range was above us and it turned cloudy. And we had to extricate Mr. V. Ramachandran's fingers from the seat because he was quite worried. Anyway, we came through that journey unscathed, and there was a nice, very good report. And while writing that report, on one evening he called me. He used to call me to Kerala House. Kerala House is delicious kanji, by the way. So he would call me there and he would give me dinner. And then we were speaking about not a popular subject, the inequities and the rivalries in the tribal communities. Contrary to what people think, we imagine the Northeast to be a monolith of communities who are united and who are close together. There's a lot of communitarian amity and so on and so forth. What we discovered was exactly the opposite. That tribal communities were rife with politics, with histories of conflict and cultural rivalries and so on and so forth. And plenty of inequities. For example, a certain tribe had a hereditary system of succession to becoming the feudal lord of the tribe. And in spite of the 6th schedule bringing in reforms which gave decentralized democracy a much stronger framework than the framework in the Panchayati Raj system was given, this was completely captured by elite males. Not only of that, within the tribe, a small group of elite males were controlling it. And the interesting thing is that in this tribe, because of the mission schools and so on and so forth, the women were in reality very assertive. They controlled the purse strings. They did a lot of the physical work. They earned a lot of money, but they had absolutely no control over the economic resources that they generated. And I was telling Mr. V. Ramachandran, sir, this is very wrong, and we should bring in all the participative methodologies that we had written about in the previous report on Panchayati Raj into this, and women should be brought to the forefront. And I mean, it's just so obviously iniquitous, and even the young males in the community rebel against this. Then he told me something which is stuck with me for the rest of my life. He said, you might want a certain change, but how you sell that change is very important. Never as an outsider recommend a change, however well-meaning your advice is. You will always be an outsider. This change has to come from within. And if it does not come from within a community, and particularly if a community is fairly small and they are therefore worried that their cultural identity will be eroded, you must ensure in some way that you catalyze this change from coming from within. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And it took us a long time to draft. It was just a paragraph, and I still have it in that report. I still consider it to be one of my reasonably good contributions to governance, where under the guidance of Mr. V. Ramachandran, we wrote a paragraph which articulated and distilled this thought in clear terms that, we suggest that these reforms come about, but from within the community, change agents have to be incentivized and supported so that the change actually comes from within the community, in which case it will be robust and it will be everlasting. He was a person who really understood. And that's when I realized, because when I traveled with him to the Northeast, I realized his depth of knowledge about the Northeast. And the reason was that during those 7 years, when he was in Indira Gandhi's secretariat as one of only 2 joint secretaries, he was the person tasked with the redrawing of the boundaries and the conversations around it when the United State of Assam was actually split into the 7 sisters. He knew every inch of that territory. And he didn't make a big deal about it. But that knowledge was there. He was like an iceberg. The bulk of his knowledge was below the waterline. But he brought it to bear on a subject, and he did it without overwhelming you or without making you feel that you are in some way ignorant. And you could make out that, it's only people with such vast reserves of knowledge who can actually apply it to future situations without really being, without needing to show it off. So it was but natural that in 2009, when I felt that I was considering leaving the IAS, I took a year off to think about it, and I went to him. He was staying in Bangalore at that stage, and I remember we went out and we went for a walk around the block of flats where he used to live. And I told him, I said, sir, I'm thinking of quitting. And he was a quintessential bureaucrat. He was not a person who would ever have thought of quitting. So I explained to him, I said, see, I believe that, after Mr. Vijayanand, I am probably the person most knowledgeable about Panchayati Raj in this country. That was an immodest statement to make, but accurate, in the sense that I had already done about 10 years of this as a battle-hardened veteran of fighting all these battles, and I already had served Mr. 𝗥𝗵𝗵𝗁 and another maverick in the form of Mr. Manishankar Iyer. So I said, this is something that appeals to me, and I cannot see myself surviving for the remaining 10 years of my service in the IAS. Dealing with some other subject. I'll forget about all what I've learned. So I'd like to stick with this subject. And I have no clear plan, but this is what I would like to do. And he encouraged me. He said, well, if that's how you think about it, all the best. And I'm sure you will do well. And that gave me the courage later to leave. The other snippet that I remember from that is I had bought a pair of brand new shoes and I had worn it when going to his house, and the neighbor's dog ran away with one of my shoes and chewed it up and returned it. So every time I would see that shoe, I'd remember that very interesting conversation that I had with Mr. V. Ramachandran. It was a pity that he should have been with us. He's one of those people that one still remembers with a smile every fortnight, every week. There's at least one occasion on which I mention his name. So it's a real privilege to be here to speak on this subject. Now let me come to the topic. What I wanted to speak about is democratic decentralization, which I believe is at the crossroads. Now, while Vijayanand might say that I'm critical of the Kerala model, let me make one thing very clear. I'm critical of the Kerala model only in the sense that the Kerala model could be much better than what it is. But if I were to make a comparative statement about the Kerala model as compared to other states in India, the Kerala model is far, far ahead of other states. But that's not really saying much, because Kerala is a state I take great pride in being from Kerala, and I believe that Kerala should set the bar so high that it should be a benchmark for the world, not for the rest of India. Now, why would I say that we are at the crossroads, and that too in a state which I consider as being one of the champions of democratic decentralization in India, if not the world? The reason I say that is that we need to really look at the theories behind the whole idea of democratic decentralization. Now, what are these theories? The theories emerge from both political science and they emerge from economic theories. And social theories too. So if you look at the political side of it, all that you can say is, empirically speaking, there are different patterns that justify a process of democratic decentralization. And the first thing to remember when you look at the political side is that it is not always about democratic decentralization. In fact, many of the countries have multi-level governance systems that have been derived not through democratic decentralization, but through democratic centralization. If you look at the United States, if you look at Switzerland, they were independent sovereign states, provinces, communes, which decided at certain points of time in their history to divest themselves of their sovereignty and entrust their sovereignty upwards till it reached the confederation level. Switzerland for many years at the confederate level did not have a tax base. It was only much later that they acquired a tax base. Now, why did they do it? It is probably to scale up the political cohesion. The United States certainly did that. There were 13 independent colonies, and then these colonies divested themselves of their sovereignty to create the federation, which was then able to secure independence, which individual colonies might not have been able to do. So it is not necessary that we should have a multi-tier governance system that is created and crafted from the top, like what has happened in India. It is quite possible, and in many countries that is what has actually happened, where the local city-states or local provinces have divested themselves of sovereignty to build a multi-level system. In fact, Pranab Bardhan calls it the difference between a coming together federation and a holding together federation. A holding together federation is an artificial construct. If you read the Indian Constitution, it's very clearly that we are a holding together federation. It says that India is a union of states. That is Article 1. And I think it's Article 2 or 3 which says that states can be created or diminished by an act of parliament, not even by amendment of the Constitution. So it is theoretically possible for India to be comprised of just 2 states. If tomorrow Parliament were to merge a few states to form state A and another state B, and the A and B are together the union of India, it's possible for this to be done. So we are a holding together federation, whereas the United States and Switzerland are coming together federations. Now what happens is that the political culture, because it has emerged from a divestation of sovereignty upwards, is markedly different in the United States and in Switzerland as compared to in India. In India, the identity of India was forged together from the top, and you created units below it. The creation of units below it might have been propelled by certain political considerations such as common identity of language, etc. But in the United States, where everybody speaks English, or in Switzerland where they only speak maybe German, Swiss German, Romansh and Italian and French, the identity is not so much of an issue as the shall I say, the imperative to create something that is scalable and defendable through a federated system. So the culture is very different. The residual powers in the United States vests with the state. It does not vest with the union. Whereas in India, under list 3 of Schedule 7 of the Constitution, the residual powers vest with the union. It doesn't vest with the state. So the culture of democratic decentralization is different. The second thing that we need to remember is Big Bang decentralization. What are the political impulses that drive Big Bang decentralization? If you look at recent examples, you will find that they vary dramatically from country to country. If you look at where countries have changed. Indonesia undertook Big Bang decentralization. Indonesia is not a federal country. Hundreds of islands. It comprises of hundreds of islands, which are actually difficult to administer as a unitary government. It was under a military dictator, and it underwent a serious financial crisis. And East Timor broke off, which was occupied area. It was a Portuguese colony which was occupied by Indonesia, and after 24 years civil war, it broke off and became an independent country, which immediately prompted Aceh province to seek independence. And that is when Indonesia underwent democratic decentralization through a Big Bang approach. It was meant to actually broadcast democracy itself, because there was no democracy centrally to begin with. So it was to broadcast the seeds of democracy locally and establish a democratic culture locally, and also as an antidote to the other alternative, which would have been balkanization. I mean, if Aceh had gone, then it was only a matter of time before Sulawesi and other, Bali asked for independence. So they decentralized overnight with the express purpose that decentralization is like an elastic band which can keep the country together, spread the culture of democracy around, and it would still hold the country as one. If you look at South Africa, the entire decentralization process, by the way, they borrowed a lot from India, because through Dr. L.C. Jain, who was the ambassador of India, the first ambassador of India to post-apartheid South Africa, they decentralized because they wanted to forget the past of segregation and apartheid. And they wanted to give powers to the black communities which had been separated from the white communities. And they have been grimly hanging on to that process, and they have been doing it. So countries undertake the process of Big Bang decentralization as a political imperative to either keep a country together or to forget an unenviable past. They might do things. So those are the political reasons. The second thing that I think we must remember, that for the architect of a political Big Bang decentralization, the political returns are often very risky. And this is something that it's interesting, because I've spoken to a lot of politicians across political ideologies. And some people have asked me, they said, what is in it for me? Will it perpetuate me? Please understand that an elected politician's first imperative is to get re-elected again. Everything, the moment that you become an elected person, unless you are unless you are really at the tail end of your career, your imperative is to ensure that you get elected again. So the person is quite justified in asking one for advice and asking the question as to whether one will be elected a second time if one does democratic decentralization. And I have to admit it's difficult to predict. If you look at Mr. Ramachandran, and that is an individual who, about whom I knew firsthand because I served in the state as a junior officer at that stage. Ramachandran was the chief minister he was a stopgap chief minister. Essentially what happened is that when Gundu Rao lost in the election, nobody had a clear majority. Bangarappa had quit the Congress to form a separate group called the Karnataka Kranti Ranga. And you had the Kranti Ranga on the one hand, and you had the Janata Dal on the other hand, warring for the position of the chief minister. And members, the MLAs were not willing from either group to accept the nominees that were suggested. Ramachandran Hegde, who was a Rajya Sabha member of the Janata party, was brought in as a rank outsider. He was not even elected to the assembly. He got elected later on and he became the chief minister. And he did not belong to any majority community. He didn't have a community backing to back him. What did he do? He appointed a rural development minister, Mr. Abdul Nazir Saab, who had never been elected to the Vidhan Sabha. He was always elected to the Vidhan Parishad. He was brought in as rural development minister, and the two of them revived the Ashok Mehta committee report and implemented it in Karnataka in 1987 with the help of Dr. L.C. Jain and others through Big Bang decentralization. It proved to be so popular that was the first time that 25% reservation was given for women. It proved to be so popular that Ramachandran Hegde was emboldened enough to announce a premature election, and he advanced the election and he won a thumping victory. Then what happened? The whole thing unraveled. What happened, the political effect of democratic decentralization was that you created a whole bunch of aspiring politicians at the local level who were not grateful to you for being empowered. They wanted more empowerment. And you also created a level of unsatisfied MLAs who felt that they were being disempowered. And of course, the large numbers of the IAS hate democratic decentralization. It's very easy for us to hate democratic decentralization because we love power. We don't like it being taken away from us. So the few of us who are on the other side are considered as eccentrics to be tolerated, right? So what happened was Ramachandran Hegde then tried to negotiate his way between these two warring groups and ended up uniformly dissatisfying everybody. And he lost the next election. The same thing happened to 𝗥𝗵𝗵𝗁. So the fruits of decentralization in terms of earning political capital are not very clear as far as people who do decentralization are concerned. A lot of dictators do democratic decentralization because they find that is a way to legitimize or to kind of paper over the fact that they acquired power through martial law. So if you see, Big Bang decentralization in Pakistan was first done by Ayub Khan and then subsequently by Musharraf. And it looks very impressive on paper, right? The whole idea was that, see, I am taking power right down to the people. I don't believe that democracy should be restricted to the national parliament or to the provincial councils. I am going to take it down to the ground level. And ultimately what happens is, it is not necessary that the ground level sarpanchas and the nazims that you create at the district level will always be grateful to you for having empowered them. So the political, if I were to sum up the political reasons for decentralization, it could be for countries to emerge in a new identity, to break down to avoid the possibility of countries balkanizing, or to earn political capital in a continuing battle for political, power. Now let's look at the economic side. The economists have always, looked at democratic decentralization not from the point of view of empowerment or social, shall I say, dignity being conveyed to somebody. It's always about the efficiency of delivering of goods and services. Now, if you look at the efficiency argument, you have basically 2 or 3 categories of economies who look at democratic decentralization. And the one category are the people led by Oates and Thibault, who say that if you decentralize, you are able to deliver services at a level where people have a comparative advantage in delivering those services, and where you are better held to account, because the person who is delivering the service is closer to the level that is demanding the service. A national government is very remote, whereas if you deliver services at the ground level, it's much better. However, it's interesting to look at the arguments given by the opponents of democratic decentralization. So the opponents of democratic decentralization, there's a very interesting article written by, a paper written by a gentleman called Prudhomme. So Prudhomme says that if you do decentralization and give national tax devolution to the local governments tend to overspend, and they leave the problem to be handled by the national government. So you end up with fiscal fragmentation and a financial crisis, for which the national government ultimately has to underwrite. Number 2, the second argument that these people say is that not all services are decentralizable. You cannot decentralize services which are interconnected services. If you have a river that has to be managed, you cannot give the absolute powers of building dams to local governments. You cannot even give it to provincial governments, because that has downstream repercussions. So this is a big argument in Government of India. I remember sitting through lots of discussion with Mr. Yugandhar on what is a watershed and whether a watershed should be, powers of setting up watershed should be decentralized to the local panchayat level. And I remember one long winded discussion like this, and at the end of it, Mr. Yugandhar changed from being a non-decentralizer of watersheds to a passionate support of decentralizing in watersheds, on the basis of the argument that we kept pressing before him, that if you do not want to decentralize the management of watersheds to panchayats, how come you are decentralizing the management of watersheds to water user committees? You say the panchayats lack capacity, and then you invent a water users committee, and overnight you fondly imagine that the water users committee has got capacity. You complain that the panchayats are political and the panchayats can be elite captured. You don't have any such problems about, you romanticize the whole process of people's participation through water user association. So these arguments were going back and forth, at which point of time Mr. Yugandhar sealed the argument by saying, "Arey, what are you saying?" I say, "Even my bathroom is a watershed. A watershed needs water coming in one place and a drainage point. Both are existing in my bathroom." So anyway, this is the absurd side of this. But the whole point is that economists often argued that that services with wide area externalities should not be decentralized. If you were to decentralize spraying against mosquitoes completely to the gram panchayats, and if there are 50 gram panchayats and one of the panchayats did not use the spray, mosquitoes don't believe in panchayat boundaries, right? So you cannot decentralize. That led to a very interesting observation by a rather cynical public finance academic named Walden. So Roger Walden said, if decentralization is a process by which you are to better manage your externalities, if theoretically all externalities can be managed by a single superhuman government, then decentralization is unnecessary and inefficient and should be avoided. Now, in the 50s, when he said that, that was a purely theoretical statement, a completely, shall I say, it was never in the realm of possibility. We could never imagine that a central authority can actually manage all externalities. But today, When you have an Aadhaar, when you have banking connection, this is the argument that many people are saying, that why do we need such a multi-level, politically crowded system where people are competing and fighting with each other if we can send the money directly to every citizen's bank account? And the citizen can then buy the services, has the purchasing power to buy the services from private providers. It's a very lovely argument on paper, which actually is being followed by a lot of neoliberals, that you really don't need to democratically decentralize. So now what is happening is, because of the fact that technology has made Walden's statement possible, you are competitor to decentralization called privatization. Privatize everything. That goes again back to theory. And there's an interesting book written by Albert Breton called Competitive Governments. While the rest of the academic tribe were arguing about which are the services that needs to be unbundled and delivered locally, this is a whole process called activity mapping, and many of the government officers who have been here have dealt with this, which is you take the activity of education or you take the activity of health and you unbundle it into categories, and then looking at who has got the comparative advantage of delivery, you assign it to different levels. Breton just wiped the table clean. He said, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Let governments compete amongst themselves. Let citizens go to either the market and or the government. If there are schools run by the national government, by the provincial government, local government, and the private sector, let them all run it. And who will run it better will gain dominance. And it really does not matter. Which is fine if you are talking about a stable population with no gap in education. But if there is a gap in education and that gap has to be built up, then there is no circumstance where services can compete. So, as I said, political, there are several reasons. On the economic side, you have the pros and cons for democratic decentralization. The pros are you deliver it locally, there's a comparative advantage, you are held to account. And the cons are, why does it matter? Technology, privatization, competitive governments can actually substitute and provide better goods and services. Now let's look at India. India is today a walking, talking disaster of local government. Things have vastly deteriorated since the time that Vijayanand and I were in the government. Do you know, if I am not sure about the exact count, but I will certainly put it in the written version of my talk. As I know, I think about 40% of the states today have not conducted elections to the panchayats. Nothing is happening to them. And I hesitate to say this in Kerala, because Kerala is one of the champion states which has never postponed elections. My state, Karnataka, which was regarded erroneously, most vehemently, I will say erroneously, as a champion in decentralization by the Indian Institute of Public Administration in the recent decentralization index, has never held its urban local government elections on time since 1994. And the panchayat elections have now been postponed. And we are expecting that the panchayat elections will be postponed again. The Gram Panchayat elections will be postponed. The Zilla Panchayat elections, etc. have been postponed. This is the reality. Now, who is supposed to protect us from this? The courts. The courts have completely wiped their hands off this. Completely. They have abdicated their responsibility. In an Ahmedabad Corporation case of 2006, Supreme Court of India, in a 5-judge bench, said that elections to local government cannot be postponed beyond 5 years. Because the constitution says that the term of a local government shall be 5 years and no more. The words used in the constitution are and no more. And the constitution also says that if before the 5-year term, let's say after 3 years, if there is some crisis and the local government has to be superseded, then a time of 6 months is given for the next election to be conducted, which will be for the remainder of the term of 5 years, which has been erroneously interpreted repeatedly by various advocates general and solicitors general, who have said that this means that you can get 5.5 years, which anybody who has a reasonable understanding of English can read the Constitution and say, this is not what the Constitution says. After the Supreme Court's landmark judgment, I remember we had a problem with Jharkhand because there was an issue of delimitation of Jharkhand, and there was a certain history related to the separation of Jharkhand from the state of Bihar, and there was a bad judgment written by a single judge bench, and it took us 4 years to get that judgment reversed in the Supreme Court. So Jharkhand was the only state which did not conduct elections. Now 40% of the states. So here we are talking about a state that hasn't conducted elections to the panchayats, winning the first position in the devolution index. What is the state of this country? It's unbelievably bad. Now, how do states overcome the imperative of the Supreme Court judgment? They do 2 or 3 things. They sometimes refuse to give money to the state election commissioner to conduct the election. They starve the election commission of money. Number 2, the Constitution says that the control and superintendence of elections. Now, those are very important words. Control and superintendence of elections is the task of the State Election Commissioner. Now, what do you mean by control and superintendence? It is not merely the act of using a machine or deploying ballot boxes. It starts with the voters list. It continues to delimitation. It continues to setting the election calendar, the conduct of the election, the declaration of the results, the handling of election disputes, the storage of the machines, all that is control and superintendence. Many of the states have taken back through legislation the power of fixing the reservation rotation and undertaking the delimitation of constituencies. And what states are doing, and there's a pattern to this. 6 months before the elections, the state will issue a reservation matrix that is so obviously at fault that immediately 20 people will go to a court and get stays. And then that's it. Then I can't do anything because it is sub judice. Or the other way of doing this is they will announce a delimitation commission, put a retired IAS officer there, right? The sole purpose, just as the purpose of the bureaucracy, the politician is to get re-elected, the prime purpose of the bureaucracy is to reproduce itself, right? So there's one retired officer who gets a job in the delimitation commission, and then they will say that since we are rapidly urbanizing, the panchayat boundaries need to be redrawn. So that is how in Karnataka we have gone from BMP, that is Bangalore Mahanagar Palika, to Brihat Bangalore Mahanagar Palika, and now we've gone to something called the GBA, Greater Bangalore Authority, and elections are not. And this bad practices travel very fast in India. So we've got a situation where panchayats do not have elections, and we speak about democratic decentralization, and the very root base of this is gone. Now that's a very dismal picture that I am painting. So what's the future? In my opinion, there is some merit in the argument that decentralization might be inefficient when it comes to handling problems with wide area externalities. And the more that we look at the future, we are going to be faced with more and more issues that have wide area externalities. You're not going to be able to stop climate change by entrusting the entire set of tasks for climate change to local governments. You cannot do it. Local governments can muster up support. Local governments can instill practices that reduce the carbon use or so on. Local governments can spread the knowledge and encourage the sequestration of carbon. But there are many issues relating to climate change that cannot be handled by the local government. It cannot even be handled by the sovereign national governments. We probably need a global governance structure to handle this. That is one of the things that we really have to consider. In which case, then what are we talking about as far as local government structures are concerned? I think the important thing here is to not look at it from a perspective of local government in that sense of the local, strengthening of the local participation. It's a question of creating the right set of incentives to drive what is known as an intergovernmental system. It is not about local governance alone. It is about reform right from the very top in creating a logical system of government relationships between different governments which set the right incentives for them to do it. One of the biggest mistakes that we have made and which we have not addressed is that in India, we have never considered local government to be an extension of federalism. We have looked at national and state as a federal structure, and local government is at the will of the state. And that is, shall I say, embedded in the constitution in Schedule 2, because local government is a state subject. Now, if we were to take a clean sheet of paper, and I think we are going to very soon reach a stage where we have to, at least at this talk, what I propose is that we need to start looking at the design of India's system on a clean sheet of paper, because otherwise, if we are trying to look at the legacies of what we have got, we are not going to end up. What I might say is completely impractical from a political perspective today, but I want to sow the seed of this thought. We need to amend the constitution not merely to strengthen the imperative to hold elections and so on and so forth. That's all tinkering along the edges. But to regard local governments as an extension of the federal system. That the city of Bangalore today, with a population that is more than Switzerland, is actually part of the federal structure of India. How are we going to do it? I have no idea. But I think that this is something on which at least discussions should begin to roll. Number one. Number two, I think, and I'm not very sure whether Mr. Manishankar would not agree with me, but I think Mr. V. Ramachandran might have agreed with me, is that we need to do away with the distinction between rural and urban. This is an artificial distinction. It might have been relevant in the 1990s when the distinction was very sharp. But let's take the contradiction that you see in Kerala. Kerala has 950 panchayats. I happen to be co-chair of a committee in Kerala set up in 2016 by the State Planning Board, in which the amazing statistic was put forward that in the 2011 census, out of the 950 panchayats, I think about 500 panchayats had lost all rural character. In other words, they were statutorily panchayats because the Kerala law regarded them as panchayats. But under the census definition, more than 70% of the people living in these panchayats were engaged in non-agricultural occupation, thus making them urban. Now, what you had in Kerala, therefore, was a system where you had to deal with urban problems with rural instruments. With rural structures, you had to deal with urban problems. Now, why did the people not object about it? Because the rural system had a better and more robust manner of participation. So it would make much more sense from a participative perspective for a panchayat to remain a panchayat, even though from a fiscal perspective, a panchayat remaining a panchayat would have seriously hampered its efforts to bring about quality urban services. So if you did away with the distinction between urban and rural, and thereby enable the fairly good system, at least structurally, of rural participation and bring it into urban areas and allow the more robust financial system in terms of flexibility to raise taxes and so on and so forth from urban to rural, you might actually get a more harmonious and a better equipped system to handle problems that are going to be increasingly seen in future. Now in Bangalore, we have some really piquant situations to handle. I live in Whitefield, which has become completely congested. Now, hardly 4 kilometers away from my house is the boundary of the Bangalore City Corporation. And beyond that is a panchayat called 𝗥𝗵𝗵𝗁𝗵𝗃. If you go to 𝗥𝗵𝗵𝗁𝗃 is 100% urban. It has 3 huge cooperative societies located there, including an Armed Forces Cooperative Society. People from the Armed Forces Cooperative Society are getting elected to the panchayats. And they're implementing NREG. Why do they need NREG? On the other hand, because they are in rural areas, they are governed by a restrictive staffing structure, which therefore prevents them from hiring enough staff to raise the huge taxes that they can raise from their tax base. There are people who have volunteered to pay taxes there. And yet that panchayat cannot raise taxes. But they do not want to join the city corporation. Because today they have 24 members in the Gram Panchayat. And there's a fairly good Gram Sabha happening there. If they join the city corporation, first of all, those 24 Gram Panchayat members will be replaced with 1 councillor and the elections will never be held. So they are resisting joining the panchayats. So this requires a lot of design in terms of participative systems. But then we need to bring it. Integrate urban and rural, do away with the distinction. And my last point that I make, and this is an unpopular point to make, but it's derived from theory, is that you must have a hard budget constraint on the local government. You know, one of the romantic notions about local government is that because of great participation, you get better quality services and so on and so forth. But empirical research, and I'd stop with this, empirical research shows that in Latin America and South America, many of the big bang decentralization, you must have heard about, what is it, city, Porto Alegre. There was this whole thing about how the participative plan of Porto Alegre was developed. The final Gram Sabha was held in a football stadium and they got a sign off and all that. You don't hear about Porto Alegre now. Why? Because a lot of local governments in Brazil did the same thing and they ended up spending much more money than their fiscal capacities to raise taxes. And ultimately there was, as Prudhomme said, fiscal fragmentation. So the second generation theories of fiscal federalism were a reality check. They emerged around 2008 and 2009. And what they said was that you must impose a hard budget constraint. And what do you mean by a hard budget constraint? That if a local government ends up with a spending spree and then is not able to repay its loans, then it must be declared bankrupt and its creditors must come and take over. And that's the US system. I think it was New York that went bankrupt many years back, and it went to Gerald Ford and asked for funding to be bailed out, and Gerald Ford used a bad 4-letter word and told them to get lost. And if you today look at the discussions about Mamdani and his approach, right? It's all about whether New York will become bankrupt or not. Mamdani wants to provide certain services, free healthcare, free transport, better education, better childcare, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, he wants to raise the money by taxing the billionaires. And the billionaires, according to some people, threatened to walk out. Except that after that, there was this kuchi scene between Trump and Mamdani. So now it looks like the billionaires will stay put. But it's interesting to see how the whole argument is about the fiscal integrity and the fiscal robustness and the migration of tax bases. I wish in India we had those arguments. We don't. Because no politicians at the top want to give pocket money to the panchayats. It's like overprotective parents, Indian parents. We don't want to cut the umbilical cord. We want our children to be empowered, but they must still listen to us. But I want to ask you a question. Would you want to give pocket money to your children in perpetuity? Don't you think that they should go out and earn money for themselves? And if they earn money for themselves and if they lose their money, to what extent are you going to support them? Tough questions. Very difficult questions for Indian parents to answer. But we should not treat our panchayat system like a joint family. And that is my worry about states like Kerala. Because in spite of Kerala's excellent record on local government strengthening, you have largely used the local governments as agencies. Excellent agencies. I will not question that. Allow them to collect their taxes. Allow them to hire tax collectors. Allow them to pool their abilities to collect taxes from taxpayers who are living in multiple jurisdictions. I know for a fact that some of your champion finance ministers have actually prevented the circulars for enhancement of taxes because he thought that it would be politically unpopular. And I've asked him this question and he smiled at me and said, have coffee. Right? So we need to look at some of these things. But again, this is an argument I'm venturing to make in Kerala. Because you don't postpone your elections, at least till now. In other states, we've gone so far behind that all these arguments are worthless. Because we've got to revive the cadaver. I'm very brutal about this. We have to revive the whole thing, the whole system. Because when you say that Panchayati Raj is running in states, it's run by administrators in other states. And my biggest worry about this is that citizens don't seem to be very concerned. So how do you build the political capital for this? Is there a defining moment like happened in South Africa or a defining moment as it happened in Brazil? I don't see that defining moment anymore. And that again comes back to theory, because if you look at one of the earliest theories of fiscal federalism, it was by a gentleman called Tiebout, T-I-E-B-O-U-T. And he said, what happens if you decentralize and give powers to local governments to deliver goods and services, that people will compare the services in different places and then vote with their feet. And that's what's happening in India. Look at the migration that's happening. So on the one hand, because I like theory, I mean, Enrico Fermi once said there's nothing more practical than a good theory. So if you look at all the predictions of theory are coming true, which means that all the solutions suggested by theory should also come true and reverse these trends. But can you explain this to anybody? I doubt it. There's so much of political distraction today. And I don't think that we are really understanding the need to make these difficult choices. So what I hope to do with this talk, and I suppose I'll refine it a bit and provide the citations, etc., is hope in a futile way that it will raise some bit of introspection, actually far removed from the immediacies of local reform. There's no point giving this talk to a bureaucrat, because the poor bureaucrat is handling a local emergent problem. But at least I think that the Buddhijivis who are all together should actually sit and introspect about these things. And that is why I think that Kerala is a fabulous place to talk about, because you have the highest density of Buddhijivis per square kilometer. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I hope, Unnikrishnan, you are looking at your phone. I hope I didn't exceed the time limit. I can take a few questions, but no stand-up comedy. Thank you. Thank you.
Or administrative field. So I will ask a layman question. See how corruption behaves in a centralized system or a decentralized system.
There's a gentleman called Robert Klitgard who's done a lot of work on anti-corruption, and he comes out with a very interesting formula for corruption. It is C equals M plus D minus A. C, corruption, equals M plus D, monopoly plus discretion minus accountability. And it is decentralization neutral. If you get a situation where there is a monopoly and there is discretion and there is no accountability, you get corruption, whether it's local or whether it is at a centralized level. Let me give you an example of local. We recently, when I was working with Accountability Initiative in the Center for Policy Research, we did a study on electronic delivery of services at local level. And what we found was that the dynamics of power at the local level had undergone a dramatic change with e-governance. You know who is the most powerful person in a panchayat today? Not the panchayat president. It's a data entry operator. Yeah. Why? Because this formula is satisfied. The data entry operator is a monopoly data entry operator. You have to go through the data entry operator if you want to prepare a housing beneficiary list. There's discretion. A very diligent IAS officer in Karnataka did a. I think my voice is echoing. Looks like I'm singing a love song in OT or something, but I'm not. So a diligent IAS officer in Karnataka, we have a rule in Karnataka saying that the Gram Sabha has to be videographed, right? So he compared the videograph in which beneficiaries were selected with the actual beneficiary list entered in the computers. 30% margin of error, right? That proves that there's monopoly and discretion and there's no accountability. You know why? Because the data entry operator is not a government servant. The data entry operator is a contract person. And now it's all outsourced. It's a very fashionable word. And if you draw the lines of connection, usually the outsourced agency is a front for a political agent. So that's local corruption. See how masterly the whole process is. And at the state level, you can take any number of experiences. We have states with transparency in government procurement. The transparency in government procurement law basically says that if a tender is above a certain value, it has to be tendered, compulsorily tendered. All that does is, and that also is based on a study that we did for the UNODC, Office on Drugs and Crime, is that it pushes the corruption to the pre-tendering stage and to the post-tendering stage. If I pay a bribe that produces a tender condition that excludes my competitor, then I will participate in a tender and I will win it. Or if I pay a bribe at the time of measurement of the work done, that's fine. So I can still go through a squeaky clean, legally compliant tender process and I can still pay a bribe. So it is actually decentralization neutral. I would argue that in another way also, that if corruption is decentralized, it actually has a fighting chance of being discovered. So it seems as if corruption is greater at the local level. But the only thing is that you can catch it earlier as compared to the higher levels where you can never catch it. What's happening?
Excuse me, sir. You have well said that the data entry operator is the most powerful guy. I had my own experience in Trivandrum Corporation itself, in Ullur zonal area. I had a shop of 200 square feet only. But he has entered in 2000 square feet. And it was told it was ended as 2 bedrooms, dining hall, kitchen, that, this and all. And the building inspector never inspected those things. They had in some understanding, and they were dictating terms with me, asking me if you want to convert it to a shop, you have to give 25,000 rupees bribe. Yeah. I fought. They could have done it within 5 days. It took me 5 months, and I had to fight with the secretary of the corporation. 5 times I went to him. I almost had a tussle with him, and later I could win it. So that is the problem with the...
Yeah. So now the point is that when you fight corruption, I'm straying into corruption, but if you fight corruption, what happens is that some people prescribe technology as a quick fix. But what actually technology does is it changes the power equation. And then you need to go in for more technology. It's always catch up as far as technology is concerned. So now what Karnataka is doing, because Karnataka does a lot of very good things. It's creative, generative, AI-based apps. So what happens is that the app removes the data entry operator from the equation. It takes the data directly from the video and enters it. So that way you can avoid the intervention by the data entry operator. So this is a constant battle. But the whole point is, when you deconstruct a circumstance, like my friend said, you use the C is equal to M plus D minus A formula, and the solution emerges from that. See, the moment that I have a interactive system, I remove discretion. The monopoly is still there. The panchayat still is a monopoly. You cannot go and put your name into a beneficiary list elsewhere. But the D is come down to 0. And so the system becomes less corrupt. But that's not predicting that corruption will be eliminated forever. There's no limit to ingenuity when it comes to corruption.
You told an important point, that where is the position of the panchayats in this federal structure. But still, every union finance commissions, they will keep a chapter entirely, chapter for the panchayats or local body things. But the recent trends, the 15th Finance Commission, I could see that they were keeping 84% of the total fund as tied. So my question is, what is your take on this tied fund to the panchayats, and how can they perform if they are how can they handle it? That's my question.
See, I happen to be a consultant to both the 14th and the 15th Finance Commissions. Now, in ideal circumstances, the panchayat, if it is part of a federal architecture, in ideal circumstances, then the panchayat should get the share of the revenue of the union government as a share. But both the 14th Finance Commission and the 15th Finance Commission continued it. They said that the grant has to come in, that it is a grant. Now, there's a big difference between a share and a grant. In fact, one of my mentors, somebody I respect very greatly, Dr. 𝗵𝗵𝗿𝗄, he was a member of the 14th Finance Commission. And that report is an excellent report. The only issue on which I differed from him is that I said, sir, consider it as a share of revenue. Then it becomes open-ended. He said, no. He had his argument. He said, if I consider it a grant, then it becomes a definite sum of money. Whereas tomorrow, if the union government goes into a steep economic decline and the revenue collected is less, if it is a grant, the grant to the panchayat is protected. Right? But if it's a share of revenue, the share will come down. I mean, the total volume of funds will come down. So he stuck to that. As far as the 15th Finance Commission is concerned, because the 14th Finance Commission increased the grant. The 13th Finance Commission had given 80,000 crore. The 14th Finance Commission increases to 2,55,000 or 2,60,000 and gave it as, but still as a grant. By the time we came to the 15th Finance Commission, we had COVID. So you really cannot fault the 15th Finance Commission, because it was operating in a system of great stress. And because it was operating at a time of great stress, it decided to be rather conservative in its grant. I look to the 16th Finance Commission, but I don't know how the 16th Finance Commission will behave. But I hope that at some stage the finance commissions will actually consider that will be one step forward in the incorporation of the panchayats and the municipalities in the federal architecture, that they should get a share. I don't mind. I mean, if the panchayats, if the country goes into an economic decline, everybody takes the hit. I don't think that's again the same thing. It's about how you treat. You cannot treat the panchayat as a teenage child. It's not. It is a government, and you should give the respect to the panchayat as a government, and therefore it must face up to fiscal vagaries. It should tighten its belt if it is not.
From the 10th Finance Commissions, we were getting 3 point something. That was our share. But now it is declining. Now it is 2 point something in the case of this grant. And they are considering only population and area into their consideration. So then obviously we will lose.
That's a
So-
huge area not related to panchayats. The same problem is happening. See, the whole question is to what extent would you incentivize development and reward those who are developing, and to what extent would you keep on subsidizing those who are poor? Very, very difficult question to answer, but it's very interesting that in the Switzerland, I teach in Switzerland, so I go there and I study their fiscal working. Everything is referendum driven. So there what happened was, it took something like 10, they don't have a finance commission system. All the provinces, that is, there are 26 cantons, they have to vote on developing the intergovernmental architecture, including the intergovernmental fiscal sharing architecture. Prosperous cantons like Zurich vetoed giving the poorer and the relatively poorer cantons more money, and it took something like 7 or 8 referenda till they finally revised the program. And we are talking about a country which is tiny, smaller than Bangalore, 8 million compared to Bangalore's 13 million. And with such a tiny difference, whereas I think in India the difference between per capita, I don't know what the latest figure is, it used to be 16 times the difference between the highest income per capita income state and the lowest. I think in the US, between Connecticut, which is the highest, and I think Alabama or Tennessee, which is the lowest, it's only about 1:2, if I'm not mistaken.
May I request if Padma Madam can address this, or at least Mr. Narayan, a couple of words to the group.
Thank you. Thank you all for attending this lecture. Thank you to Mr. Vijayanand and Raghunandhan for this outstanding presentation and lecture that he has just given. To borrow a sentiment that my father might have expressed with his wry wit, Raghunandhan is one of those rare people who have a brain and a spine, and rarely enough they are connected. So it's a true pleasure to have listened to this. I think this is worthy of not only recording and disseminating, but perhaps using it as a kernel of a catalyst for something to be reborn in this country that we desperately need. But again, I think Mr. Raghunandhan and Mr. Vijayanand both mentioned my father would have greatly appreciated not only the history lessons, but also the fact that, as Maynard Keynes said, when the facts change, we have to change with it. So with the advent of technologies, the nature of decentralization and the practice of decentralization may have to change. And I think it behooves us to begin that process of debate and discussion so that we can lay this in front of society for them to adopt as they go forward. So thank you again for an outstanding evening session here of discussion and provoking of thought that I think my father would have greatly enjoyed, and in his own way is probably smiling from above. Thank you again. And on behalf of my mother, thank you all for including her and perpetuating this lecture.
Many
Thanks.
thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Narayan sir, for your words. CMD has also taken a noble initiative by consolidating the previous memorial lectures delivered by eminent personalities into a book. In addition, the selected essays and lectures of the late B. Ramachandran have also been brought together in a special volume. It's my honor to request our chairman, Shri S.M. Vijayanand, to invite Shri Raghunandhan to release the books. I would also like to invite Dr. Shivaraman to receive the first copies of the books. May I now request our chairman, Shri S.M. Vijayanand, to kindly present a memento to Shri T. Raghunandhan. And I request Shri T. Raghunandhan to kindly receive our token of love and honor. Thank you, sirs. May I now invite Dr. 𝗂𝗶𝗺, Professor, Center for Management Development, to propose vote of thanks.
Good evening, all. Respected dignitaries on the dais, distinguished guests, well-wishers of V. Ramachandran sir, family members of V. Ramachandran sir, my colleagues, dear friends, and guests for today. It is my privilege to propose vote of thanks on behalf of Center for Management Development to all the dignitaries here. First of all, we have to propose vote of thanks to our chairman, Shri 𝗟𝗲𝗰𝗁𝗁 sir. Sir, we are sincerely thankful to you. You are the only person instrumental for conducting today's memorial lecture in a successful way. Sir, your continued support to CMD in all its endeavor is really encouraging for us. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. A special note of gratitude due to our speaker of the day, Shri T. Raghunandhan sir. He has come all the way from Bangalore to here, for he delivered an exceptionally insightful and thought-provoking lecture. Sir, we are really proud to get you as a chief guest here, and for your kind words and sharing your memories and association with Ramachandran sir. You're sharing your thoughts on democratic decentralization grounded with your decades of experience. Really, it offered us a clear understanding and inspiration. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation and be here. Our special thanks and gratitude goes to Padma Madam and family members of Ramachandran sir, Mr. Narayanan Ramachandran, Shobha Madam, for joining us online today and sharing the thoughts and cherished memories of Ramachandran sir and association with the CMD and all of us here. Thank you, Madam. Thank you very much. We are extremely thankful to all the senior IAS officials here. Sheila Madam, Jodhilal sir, and Tinku Biswal Madam. Your presence and your active participation and gracing this occasion. A special word of gratitude due to our director, Dr. 𝗏𝗏𝗺𝗃, for his guidance and support for the successful conduct of today's program. Thank you, sir. We express our deep gratitude to all the senior officials, participants from all government departments, central and state PSUs, academic and research institutions, those who have come here and attended this program for the thoughtful questions and active participation. Thank you all. I extend my sincere gratitude to our former director, Dr. M. Shivaraman, for receiving the book of Ramachandran sir, and sir, your presence and guidance for this function. Thank you, sir. Now I extend our gratitude to senior officers and experts and well-wishers of CMD. Jagma sir is here. Members of Planning Board, Unnikrishan sir is here. And all other senior officials and well-wishers of Ramachandran sir, those who have joined here. Thank you all. And let me also express our sincere thanks to the organizing committee. Only because of their hard work and meticulous planning, we could successfully conducted today's event. Finally, I am expressing out of thanks to all my colleagues, all the senior officers, experts, advisors, and staff members, retired staff members, and retired faculty members of CMD, those who have joined here and gracing this occasion with their warm participation. Raghunandhan sir, thank you once again for sharing your and enriching us with your vast wisdom. Thank you, sir. Thank you all for joining with us. Have a good day. Thank you.